Chapter 9. You're too afraid to make decisions. I knew Abby through friends of friends. As often happens with new people you meet, we got chatting at a party. She told me that she and her partner hadn't been happy for a long time. I was a bit surprised that she revealed something so personal to somebody she'd only just met. Don't worry, she laughed. Trust me, the state of mine and Tom's relationship is very much not a secret. Ask anyone in this room. They've all heard it all. They'd met young, she said, had 2 kids quickly, and it was only when things had settled down a bit that they discovered that they had nothing in common, apart from the children that they both loved dearly. They lived pretty separate lives now. When they did spend any time together, which wasn't often, they were at each other's throats constantly. We're just different people, she said, sounding resigned and sad. We're fundamentally incompatible. I don't really know how else to explain it. I'm just so torn between not wanting to chuck everything away after all these years and wanting to give myself the chance of starting again. Perhaps having another family with someone else. Every time I try to work out what to do, I feel my head start spinning. What happens if by trying to make things better, I just end up making things worse? And who's to say I'm going to be happier if I do leave Tom? I don't want to fucking die alone with cats for company, do I? She stopped talking. I could see she was looking at me as if expecting something. Then it clicked. She wanted me to make her decision for her. She wanted someone else to tell her that she should either double down and try to fix what was left of her marriage or get out while she still could. I can't give you what you need, I told her. That's not my call to make. You know that, don't you? She looked disappointed and nodded her head. A lot of people are like Abby. They can't or won't make decisions. They are afraid of the consequences of getting a wrong decision, which very often simply means that they're afraid of being judged by others. And a lot of the time, people just don't trust in themselves. They'll think about that new job they've considered applying for and end up asking themselves, am I good enough? Do I know enough? Will I make a fool of myself? Then the decision that lies before them stops looking like an opportunity and starts to feel like a burden. They slope their shoulders, hoping that someone else will make the decision for them, or that some act of God will mean they don't have to make up their mind. All the while, their world is shrinking. Their opportunities for growth and excitement are dwindling. They're always waiting. Then, all of a sudden, they find it's too late. And it's then, only then, that the diverer turns round and says, oh, I could have done that. Yeah, maybe you could. Maybe you did have it in you. But the fact is, you didn't. The number one thing that ex-military people say to me is, I wish I'd gone on selection. It's the biggest regret in my life. I hear it again and again. There's only one response to that. Well, why didn't you? I believe that every challenge you turn away from, every experience you avoid, makes your world shrink. When you don't commit to a decision, you're depriving yourself of the chance to change and grow. You're ensuring that your world will stay forever the same. And it's when you stay still like that you become vulnerable to stress, to anxiety. Doing nothing is not the safe option it might look like at first. Doing nothing means you cut yourself off from the chance to learn, evolve, and change, to make mistakes, to embrace failure, to succeed. You're not allowing a process to occur that should be taking place within us all. You end up trapped behind a wall that you have built. And the danger is that this stasis becomes your norm. But when you do have the confidence to make decisions, you don't live with regrets, even if sometimes you end up making the wrong call. There's nothing in my life I regret. Nothing. Everything, good or bad, has helped me and has formed part of my learning curve. And the reason I don't have any regrets is because I've committed to everything I've done. When you commit, you're either going to get it right or you're going to get it wrong. I'd rather live my life learning from mistakes than I would being that person sitting on his sofa asking himself, what if? Don't make a mountain out of a molehill. One mistake so many of us make over and again is to cast decisions as being dramatic, set-piece events. But in truth, making our mind up is part of the texture of our lives. We make over 30,000 decisions a day. Over 200 of these are about food. You're so good at making decisions that most of the time you take them without even being aware of it. What time to get out of bed? Should I leave 5 minutes early to beat the traffic? What route should I take? Shall I order a flat white or a cappuccino? But we forget this when it comes to the so-called big decisions. We forget that the ability to choose one option or another is just like a muscle that we use over and over again. And so we make it harder than we need to because we build up its significance in our head. If you end up writing endless lists of pros and cons, you'll find yourself caught in a messy web of words and figures. I know people get so wrapped up in the stress of making a decision that it stops them ever doing stuff that would actually make them happier and healthier. Instead of taking positive action, they are paralysed by indecision. So much so that it even affects their sleep. At the end of the day, making decisions is purely a psychological process. It demands nothing physical of you. Do I commit to this course of action? Yes or no? It's as simple as that. Then you make a start. Take a step. Take small chunks off the problem. Why you should never be afraid of what you don't know. The other trap people fall into is waiting endlessly until they feel they know enough to be sure before they commit. But you're never going to have the perfect knowledge of the future, which is precisely what makes it so exciting to me. The only way you'll ever find out what's going to happen is to commit and take the plunge, then soak up the consequences, whatever they may be. Or you could choose the alternative, which is to do nothing and live with regret because once again, life has rushed past and left you behind. Certainty only comes after it's already too late. The best decision makers are those who have made their peace with the knowledge that none of us is ever going to be able to control every element in our messy, imperfect, exciting universe. Just do it. Self-esteem and the ability to make decisions go hand in hand because a decision is a statement of faith in your abilities. It's a commitment to yourself and your future. I always believe that I can make something work. I go into every project confident that I'll be able to meet whatever challenges it throws up. It's this that underpins my decision making. But when you lack self-confidence, if you're the sort of person who has convinced yourself that everything you touch turns to shit, so why even bother trying, you're always going to hesitate before making that crucial commitment. Chapter 10 contains tips on how to build your self-belief, but I'd urge you to remember two things. The first thing is that you're probably much more capable than you're willing to admit. So why give up in advance? Why not give yourself the chance to find out how strong and competent you really are? After all, you don't win a race by giving up before the starting gun has been fired. Another way to build your confidence when it comes to making decisions is to simply do it. I've always believed that you've got to action stuff if you really want to understand it. I might want to walk along a gravel path in bare feet, but until I actually do it, I won't actually know whether I should be putting my weight on my toes or my heels. It's by actioning something that you come up with a solution. And the more you commit to making decisions and dealing with their consequences, the easier they'll become. You'll realise how much better you feel knowing that instead of shirking the challenge and retreating that bit further into the darkness of your shell, you're making steady progress in the right direction. You'll also realise that you have much less to lose than you think. What's the worst thing that could happen? The worst thing in the world when you're in combat is a leader who is incapable of making decisions. Even a bad decision is almost always better than no decision. The same is true of life in Civvy Street. If you make a decision and it doesn't work, then that's a shame, of course. But you now know a hell of a lot more than you did 5 minutes or a day ago. You now know that that particular technique doesn't work, that an option is off the table. You've taken another step closer to finding the solution. A job or a relationship doesn't work out. That can be truly unpleasant, but at least you know that that company or that person wasn't for you. Not everything and everyone is. And now you're not going to go to your grave wishing you'd given it a go. An experience might be positive. It might be negative. That shouldn't matter to you. What's important is that you've had that experience. And it's now up to you to make something positive out of it. Ultimately, when you make a decision, you're engaging more fully with the world around you. You're putting yourself out there. You're giving yourself a chance. You're opening yourself up to opportunities. So even if you make the wrong decision, or if whatever it is you end up deciding to do has some unintended consequences, you're putting yourself in a position to grab something good for yourself. That probably means taking risks and opening yourself up to failure. And that probably also means that people will talk about you. Good, you're doing something. But think of all the things that will pass you by if you don't step out of the door. Exercise, a friend in need. When you're agonising about a decision, ask yourself what advice you'd give a friend in your position. It's really clarifying to be able to adopt a different perspective. I bet 9 times out of 10, you'd tell them to go for it, wouldn't you? You'd explain how important it was that they went ahead and pursued the opportunity to get the promotion that had just come up at their firm. And you'd probably be far more confident when it came to telling them to leave a relationship that was no longer making them happy. You might even point out how regretful they'd be if they didn't. Why not adopt the same approach to your own life? Who are you making the decision for anyway? The thought of what other people might think looms too large in most human beings' decision-making. We're so quick to say to ourselves, what will other people in my office say if I do X or Y? Or, I get that call wrong. I've got to work with them. I've talked about how to overcome the fear of people's judgment in Chapter 5. But what I want to say here is that if you're letting the thoughts of what your mum, your mates or your colleagues might say if you make a particular decision cloud your thinking, then you're asking yourself the wrong questions. You're not making a decision for them, you're making it for you. So why should you give a fuck what they think or say? Think of Christopher Columbus, a great example of the good that can come from someone getting a decision really fucking wrong. He transformed his failure to discover a new route to India into something that changed the course of history. Because he committed to it. You don't know where your decision is going to take you, but you sure as hell know where not taking a decision will take you. Nowhere. Don't sweat the small stuff. You could be the sort of person who does 1,000,000 hours of research every time you buy a new kettle. Or you could accept that whichever one you buy will probably do a good enough job, and that there probably isn't a perfect kettle out there. It's fair to say that there almost certainly isn't one that's worth the agonising decision-making process you force yourself to go through. Some decisions are important, most aren't. So don't waste your energy agonising over stuff that really doesn't matter. If you make every decision into a psychodrama, you're not only going to increase your stress, you'll also start to feel less in control of your existence. The magnet. The more you learn to trust your instincts, the more confident you will become when it comes to making decisions. In fact, you will barely be aware of the process of making your mind up at all. One of the first things I say to people who come to me saying they've hit a wall is this: where is your energy taking you? What do you feel drawn to? The answer has to come from you. People can guide you. They can give you all the help in the world, but only you really have the answers. Only you know when you take that first footstep, whether it feels right or wrong. I always know when I've hit a wall. I can feel that change. My body seems to vibrate with impatience. I'm like a nail being dragged across the table by a magnet. There's a voice inside me going, "It's time for something new. It's time for something new." Then I know it's time to connect to that energy and find out what it is I need to do next. It's up to me to try to decipher what's going on. Otherwise, there's a chance of a missed opportunity. Somebody else will charge in and leave me wondering what could have been. I don't want to be one of those people who reach the end of their lives loaded down with regrets. I trust myself because I've committed so often. I've done it so many times that I'm confident that I'll always be able to figure it out. My television career could fall to pieces. I might never sell another book. Of course, I'd be disappointed. I love what I do. But you better believe I'd find something else. It might not come immediately. I might have to search for a while. There might be a few false starts, but it's gonna come. Then, when you find it, you have to commit. Go all in. When you commit to yourself, everything else will follow. Whether it works out or not, you'll learn something. And when you learn, you grow. It hasn't worked out, but I'm so glad I gave myself the chance to find out. Now I know I can go forward without any regrets. You can steam forward knowing you're not going to get demoralised by low self-esteem, jealousy, envy. If when you're thinking about committing to something, you feel uncomfortable, then that's a good sign. It means that you're being pulled towards it. And while nobody likes the sensation of being pulled around, because we all like to feel as if we're in control, you must not ignore that energy. Now that I'm familiar with that feeling, I recognise it as a sign that whatever is causing it is something that I should probably take a look at. I wonder whether the same was true for Christopher Columbus. We think his big decision was whether to travel around the world, but that's not true. He already knew what he wanted to do. He didn't have to agonise about it or write a list of pros and cons. He was being pulled towards that journey. The only decisions he had to make were small ones. What sort of ship should we take? Who do I want to come with me? How much water do we need? How many provisions? If you know yourself, if you have made the effort to connect with yourself, you will lead yourself to where you need to be. This is what I explained to Abby while we were sipping our drinks at the party. The answer you're looking for, I said, isn't outside you. I don't have it. That woman over there doesn't have it. It's not fucking floating around in the air above us. It's inside you. You're the only one who knows. You've got to find that answer. And then, when you found it, commit to it. Commit to all the good and bad that your answer represents, because there isn't going to be a perfect solution. There probably isn't going to be any solution to your situation that doesn't involve pain. But if you just stay in an anguished state of mind forever, you're going to drive yourself round the bend. It's not good for you, for your husband or your kids. Ask yourself what path you're being pulled towards. Then just take it and don't look back. Lessons. You should never forget that every decision you duck is just a regret that you're storing up for later. You might think you've dodged something, but you're deceiving yourself. One day, that failure will bite you in the arse. Don't make decisions any harder than they need to be. Don't spend too much time anguishing over consequences. Don't draw up endless lists of pros and cons. Trust your instincts. If you think something is right, jump in. The consequences of not doing something are almost always worse than giving it a go. Even when a decision you take doesn't work out, there is so much you can learn from the experience. That failure will make you far stronger than hiding away on your couch ever could. So, if you make the wrong call, don't worry too much. It's not the end of the world, but be humble. Be honest with yourself and take any criticism you receive on board. Usually, when stuff goes wrong, you're left with a pretty clear idea of how you might do better next time. That's crucial information. Don't ignore it. Don't get bogged down with anxiety over inconsequential decisions. Our lives are full of enough stress as it is, so why add to it? Chapter 10. You don't believe in yourself. Too many people spend their whole time on this planet telling themselves, I can't do that. When this becomes your mantra, you're basically giving up on life before you've even got started. These words, I can't do that, shrink your world and may prevent you from throwing yourself into challenging experiences that will enhance your existence because you're convinced you won't be able to cope with the stress. But here's the thing. You only need a spark of self-belief to change I can't do that into I can do that. And that spark will come if you're willing to commit. I remember one exchange I had with a woman who'd lost her mum 4 days before my tour rolled into her town. The night she came, I'd been speaking about commitment. Don't look at the journey in its entirety, I'd say. Because if you do that, it'd look too much and you won't even put your foot on the bottom rung of the ladder. You won't commit. Instead, look to commit step by step. Make small, positive movements in the right direction. Each time you move forward, get used to the new space. Then, when you're comfortable, take another step. Commit again and again and again. Do it in your own time. Don't rush. Don't give yourself a deadline, because you'll just end up in a race against yourself. The example I gave them was the vehicle dunking drill from SAS Australia. The contestants climb into a Land Rover and fasten their seatbelt. The car is then lifted up and dumped into the water. As soon as it reaches the bottom and is fully submerged, the drill begins. The contestant needs to remove their seatbelt and leave the vehicle by an exit at its rear. We'd simulated the window having shattered. All in all, they're in there for 40 to 50 seconds. Straightforward, but also a proper fucking challenge that asks as many questions of their mind as it does their body. The important thing is that you don't panic once the vehicle has been dropped and starts filling up with water. If you take your seatbelt off then, before it reaches a stop, you'll just get pinned to the roof. One of the other DSs demonstrated what the contestants needed to do. Now you've seen what you need to do, I told them. You need to remember that once the process starts, it doesn't stop. Who wants to step forward and go first? Instantly, one of the guys, Manu Fidel, stood up and took off his armband. He was done. This wasn't much of a surprise to me, as he'd already tried to VW at least once before. Fair enough. Out of the corner of my eye, I'd already seen Bonnie Anderson, one of the women. Her chin was down and I could see fear all over her face. She made a move to stand up too. She also wanted to hand her armband in. No, I said. I was not having that. I knew that Manu was done, but with Bonnie it was different. She was just petrified by this particular challenge because she had a phobia of drowning. I took her to one side, away from everyone else, and said, "Look, I can tell this is one of your biggest fears, but I can't let you quit. You're looking at this task in its entirety, and that's overwhelming. Unsurprisingly, Your fight or flight response is in overdrive, and all you want to do is get out of here. What I'm going to do is break all of this down for you into manageable bits. I just want you to go through a small series of commitments. I don't expect you to commit to the end. All I ask is for you to go as far as you can. Your first commitment is to get in the vehicle. Sit down and put your seatbelt on. Nothing more. You don't need to think about what happens after that. She did this, no problem. I waited until she was ready. Now we're going to lift you up, then you'll be submerged in the water and the drill will begin. However, the driver's side window will be open. That's the sort of thing you should be observing anyway. When you make that first commitment, observe everything. Try not to let any detail escape you. Don't seize up. If you start to panic, you can just undo your seatbelt and escape through the window. Although, if you do that, you will fail the course. I wasn't worried about whether or not she'd fail that task. A lot of people would fail. All I wanted was to see her commit. That's another little commitment out of the way. If you can stay in, then wait until the car finally reaches the bottom. Then take your seatbelt off and get out the back. You will have completed the task. Are you ready to commit to these stages? Yeah, she said. I can get in the vehicle. A start. A commitment. That was enough for me. She got in, and I made her try taking the seatbelt off a couple of times. I wanted her to see what it was like, and for her to see that this was one element she'd already mastered. When we were both happy, she put her hands on the steering wheel. Are you ready to commit to the next phase? She exhaled and looked unsure. I don't know, Staff. I don't think I can. Why not? I feel as if I've hit the wall. I'm scared. I'm going to panic. What happens if I get caught on something and I can't get my seatbelt off? But you've just shown me you can do that. No problem. Yes, I can, quite happily. So you've been through this first commitment phase and you know you're not going to get caught or snagged up. And remember, what's on your right? The open window. Did you notice that? No. She was almost laughing at this. It's a big hole. Worst case scenario, you can use it. She looked again, then back to me, then down at her seatbelt. Another deep breath. I'm ready to commit. Good. Now don't burden your mind with bullshit and complication. She had a last burst of uncertainty. What if I get snagged? What if I panic? You know neither of those things is going to happen. Just make one commitment at a time. Close your eyes, grab the steering wheel, and clear your mind of all the bullshit you've just been spouting. Let me know when you're good to go. 20 seconds passed. My mind's clear, Staff. Now, can you hold your breath for 40 seconds? Once a vehicle lifts up, that's all you need to do. Ignore the crane, ignore the water, ignore everything else. Yes, Staff, quite easily. Good. You can do that. And you've already shown you can undo your seatbelt. So all you have left to do is swim 2 meters out of the back of the vehicle. Boom. You could see the change in her eyes immediately. That's what I love so much about this show. I saw her, sitting cool as a cucumber as the vehicle was hoisted up and then slowly lowered into the water. She stayed calm as the water rose higher and higher, covering her belly, her chest, her neck, her chin, her mouth, her nose, then rising past her eyes. Still, she did not flinch. When she felt the squeeze on her shoulder that told her that it was time to release, she continued to show the same almost otherworldly poise. When she slipped out of the belt and eased her way out of the back of the Land Rover, it was as if she had lived her whole life at the bottom of the sea. When she emerged, her thumb raised in triumph, I knew something had changed inside her forever. 3 days later, in the middle of the easiest, most innocuous task you can imagine, she quit, just as she threatened to before. This time, however, I knew that she really was at the end of her journey. When I took her inside afterwards, I asked her what was going on. "I'm done, staff. I'm still so overwhelmed and happy after that water task. I don't need to complete the course in order for me to feel as if I've succeeded. That was my success. When I first saw that task, I never believed in a million years that I'd be able to do it. But when you broke it down like that, everything flipped. It's given me all the self-belief I ever needed. And if you look at her now, she is flying." The biggest gift we can give ourselves is self-belief. It can't come from anybody else. It has to be you. It doesn't matter how many times other people tell you how wonderful you are. If you don't believe in yourself, then these are just empty words. And self-belief comes from commitment. If you commit to something, even if you don't achieve your ultimate objective, then you're already on the way to success because you've committed to yourself. It's amazing what you learn from just committing once, for a few seconds. You start there, and God knows where that might lead to. The voice in your head that whispers, "I can't do this, I can't do this," gets transformed into one that shouts, "I can do it. I can do it." There's no magic to any of this. All I did, all you have to do, is strip away everything that isn't real so that you're left with the actual tasks at hand. Don't fill your mind with apocalyptic scenarios. Don't think about every single worst-case scenario. That's all speculation, nothing more. These scenarios just might exist at some point in the future. But they certainly fucking don't at this precise moment in your life. Instead, think about what is in front of you right now. Then commit to it. Simple as that. The woman who messaged me after losing her mother said that this conversation about commitment was the main thing she took from my show. Before she'd left the house that evening, she'd been involved in a complex and increasingly heated conversation with her two sisters. Because she was the eldest, her sisters wanted her to write and deliver their mother's eulogy. But she had told them point blank that she couldn't do it. No way. Not in a million years. She had all of that ringing in her ears when she turned up at the venue. The following morning, she woke up with her mind full of everything I'd said about the commitment phase. She got up, went downstairs, and repeated to herself something I'd said on stage the night before. Make that first commitment and see where it takes you. Almost without knowing what she was doing, she grabbed paper and a pencil, put them on the table in front of her, and sat down. She had no idea what she was going to do with it. Until the pencil started moving on the paper, she didn't even know what the first words were going to be. But once she started, she found that she could not stop. To begin with, she was pretty much just doodling. "I love you, Mum. I miss you, Mum." She filled a whole page, then looked at what she'd done. She ripped the page off, put it to one side, and asked herself, "But why do I love you? Why do I miss you?" Before she knew it, she'd filled another couple of pages. 24 hours earlier, she thought she was incapable of writing a eulogy. Now, she was holding one in her hand. At the moment she sent me the message, she was still unsure whether she'd be able to actually stand up and deliver it at the funeral. "But I want to thank you, Aunt," she put in her message. "That commitment phase really helped me. It really works. I used to think I couldn't write a eulogy. I've proved that I can. So although as I'm writing this, I don't know whether I'll be able to speak these words in public, I'm beginning to think that that could change too." Whether or not she did give that eulogy, look how far she'd come in such a short time. Her experience reminded me of that part of SAS Australia I love the most. The moment usually arrives 4 or maybe 5 days in. It's when the recruits become aware of how much they've already changed. You can practically see them thinking, wow, I didn't know I could do that. I've never felt that emotion before, but I've got through it and it felt good. That's why I do the show. Not for the money or the fame or because I love being on TV, but because there's no better feeling than showing other people how amazing our bodies and minds are and how much we're capable of. The armory. A lot of people struggle with self-belief because they struggle with controlling their emotions. They feel as if they're at war with themselves. The powerful weapons in their emotional armory that should be working on their behalf are actually turned against them. This is something I talk about in great detail in my last book, Mental Fitness. If you want to be able to control your emotions, you have to be willing to expose them until you understand them completely. You're never going to be able to expose them, however, if you live a risk-free life inside your comfort zone. So put yourself in situations that you know are going to provoke your emotions. Then, when an emotion wells up inside you, don't just let it float away. Grab it and study it. Work out precisely what it is that triggered you. How did that emotion manifest itself in you? Then do it again and again and again. Repetition is the key. When you've exposed that emotion enough, it will stop working against you and start working for you. That's what I did with the fear I experienced before and during combat. I kept on provoking it again and again, walking that delicate line between life and death. To begin with, I'd feel completely engulfed by terror, and it was just like one of those car crashes, with everything slowing down. Then, when it was over, I almost couldn't believe I was still alive. I needed to get somebody to pinch me to check. But after a while, after I'd ripped off layer after layer, I started to make the feeling of fear work for me. I'd burst into a room that I knew was full of enemy combatants, and the fact that time slowed down now became an advantage. I started moving differently, acting differently. Once I'd learned how to harness it, I became, paradoxically, more peaceful than at any other time in my life. I knew I was either going to die in that room or walk out of it alive. There was no complication. It was the purest form of life. I experienced seconds filled with euphoria rather than paralysing fear. But what frustrates me is that there isn't much incentive nowadays to expose and master your emotions in this way. I think it's because if you can control your emotions, then it almost makes you self-sufficient. And society doesn't want that. It wants you to be reliant on the system. It wants you to feel as if you're a liability, that unless you suppress yourself, you'll be an outcast. It wants you to be able to say, oh, he's on medication. He's no trouble now. This is why the media are always looking for signs of vulnerability in me. They keep coming and they keep coming. They want to find those chinks in my armour because they want me to be beholden to them. They want to be able to say, we can do something for you. Now you are reliant on us. The enemy in the mirror. Too many of us are our own worst enemies. It's not exactly controversial to point out that if somebody hates themselves, they're always going to struggle with confidence. If you don't think you deserve to be happy, you'll struggle to ever become the best version of yourself. People who are really consumed with self-loathing often end up destroying healthy relationships or putting a bomb on the brilliant job opportunities because they don't feel as if they deserve them. If you think about yourself in those terms, it's always going to have a profound physical effect. If you think you're shit, then you'll feel like shit. It's such a heartbreaking thing to see in somebody else. By contrast, when you start thinking of yourself as somebody who deserves to be happy and healthy, it'll transform your behaviour in subtle ways. You'll probably eat more healthily and take more exercise because you'll have started to think of yourself as something valuable that needs to be taken care of. I'm not saying for a second that you should start writing love letters to yourself, but I am saying that it's time to give yourself a break. You'd never treat your friends or family like that, so why the hell would you ever do that to yourself? When somebody comes to me and tells me that they're struggling with self-esteem, the first thing I ask them is, why? This usually comes as a surprise to them. They're so used to talking themselves down that it's become habitual to them, to the extent that they're now actually shocked that the dim view they take of themselves isn't shared by the rest of the world. When they've recovered, they usually say something like, "Oh, it's because I know other people don't think I'm good enough." I said to one lad who gave me this response, "Who is it that goes around every single day telling you that you're not good enough?" A pause, a look of confusion on his face. "Well, no one." "Is there a man following you around shouting at you that you're not good enough?" He smiled at this and chuckled. "No, of course not." "So why are you so overwhelmingly sure that you're not good enough?" "You know, my school reports, my exams, that sort of stuff." "Okay," I said. "Let's start with your school reports. What are they saying?" "That you need to work on certain aspects, make a bit more progress. Or are they telling you that you're a waste of space? That there's no point because you're worthless?" They're giving me stuff I need to work on. So they're telling you that you need to improve, not that you're not good enough. That's a bloody big difference. You just told me that you're not good enough, but you're the only person out there saying that. You've convinced yourself that you're not good enough. Those school reports aren't a condemnation. They're a roadmap showing you where you need to go if you want to improve. They're telling you that because they want you to do better, because they've got your best interests at heart, and because they think you're capable of it. If they'd given up on you, do you think they'd bother? If you can just improve a bit, that's amazing. We all learn in different ways. The important thing, the thing you need to understand, is that nobody has ever said to you, "You're rubbish, just pack it in." Now let's look at exams. You've had a bad exam result, but that's not who you are. It's just a measure of how you've performed academically on one given day, in one particular subject. It's entirely external. It's noise. Let's say that your year at school is divided into different sets for maths. Your friends might all be in the second set, while you're in the third. That doesn't mean anybody is saying that you're not good enough. It's purely an assessment of where your maths is at right now. If you'd been put with your friends in set 2, you probably would struggle and have to go down a set, which really would damage your confidence. What happens instead is that you've been given a chance to get better, build your confidence, and then maybe at some point in the future, take on the challenge of going up a group. The only way is up. "It's just what's happened with my son," I told this lad. "And what I've explained to you is exactly what I said to him. I don't expect him to change classes immediately, but I do want him to put the work in that means he improves, even if it's just a tiny amount." What he forgets is that while he doesn't find maths as easy as his mates who's in the top set, he thrives at science. He's in the highest group for that, because he's fascinated by the amazing world we live in and trying to find out as much as possible about how it all works. He's a victim of the mistake so many of us make. He's convinced himself that because he's not good at one thing, then he's shit at everything else. Fake it till you make it. I'm a bit suspicious of the whole idea that you can fake it till you make it. It feels as if you're trying to build something on fairly shallow foundations. I think a much more secure and enduring way of building your self-belief is actually showing yourself how much you're capable of. I do, however, absolutely agree that it's a good idea to show the world that you believe in yourself right from the get-go. That sort of confidence is conveyed by the way you look and the way you comport yourself. Is your back straight? Can you look others in the eye? Do you march into rooms or do you creep into them? You can project confidence, making sure it's the first thing somebody notices about you. For better or worse, other people form their opinions and make their decisions about you on the basis of the version of yourself that you show to the world. So why not make sure that when you meet somebody for the first time, they see the best of you? Exercise. The CV trick. When I talk to people who are struggling with self-doubt and insecurity, there's always one thing I ask them. If you were to write me a CV, you'd write the hell out of it. I can do this, I can do that. Let's be honest. Some of it might be an exaggeration, but of course it is. You really want that job. So why don't you do that to yourself? Why don't you flip that script? If you did get that fictional job, you'd jump in and do everything you can to live up to all the promises you made on your behalf. You'd do it for somebody else. But why won't you do the same for yourself? Stop listening to all the negative, self-doubting voices that sit inside your head telling you what you can't do. Instead, pretend that you're writing a CV. List all of the things that you can do. Commit your positive qualities to paper. This is the person you really are. This is what you're capable of. Lessons. You can build your self-belief by making small commitments. Every time you make a commitment, you're giving yourself tangible proof of what you're capable of. The more commitments you make, the more your self-belief will grow. Too often, our low self-esteem is a result of the negative way that we talk or think about ourselves. The only reason we think we're a piece of shit is because that's what we tell ourselves all day long. You should look to change the record as soon as you can. When somebody tells you that you've got room to improve, they're not writing you off. And they're not telling you that you're worthless. They're trying to help you because they believe in you. The correct response isn't to sulk or to let it affect your self-belief. It's to show them that they were right to have faith in you. Chapter 11. You're struggling to cope with loss. My cousin George had a heart as big as the planet. George was a loving, positive kid. He wasn't loud or particularly talkative, but when he walked into a room, you were immediately drawn to him. He had that sort of energy. There was a lovely mischief about him, and an insatiable curiosity. The world was magic to him, and he always wanted to know more. Somehow, whenever I went over to his house when I was younger, there would be an alarm raised about George. George has gone missing. I've no idea how many times I heard that. He'd just wander out of the front garden, and nobody would know anything of it until a neighbour brought this happy bundle of laughs and jokes back home. They almost always said the same thing. Can I keep him? His sister had this great story about them after they recently moved to Chelmsford. The school was a couple of minutes' walk away from their house. One day she was out in the playground when she looked up and saw a nappy-clad toddler bustling past. George. He stopped at the playground gate, calmly waiting for his sister. But the thing about George was, I don't think he ever felt understood, even though he was loved deeply by so many. You could say he suffered right through his life as a result of this, because he was a wild ball of energy. People saw him as a problem to be fixed, rather than as a human being who needed to be listened to and comprehended. He was bright, but the system's sense of what was best for him never coincided with what he wanted for himself and what he knew he could achieve. Quite early on, he was diagnosed with ADHD. It wasn't like he had zero concentration or no sense of boundaries, just that he was a hyperactive kid. Make of that what you will. I mean, if they'd been diagnosing that sort of thing back in the 80s, then the majority of us might have been given some mild form of that label. I bet I'd have been. I couldn't stop moving, but luckily I had rural France, the whole countryside, with its dens, empty cornfields and endless horizons was like a huge playground. But London is different. An energetic kid is always going to end up crashing into too many things. I don't doubt that the people from outside the family who intervened in George's life did so with the best of intentions. And yet, it's hard not to wonder whether they did more harm than good. I was talking to my auntie, George's mum, recently, and she'd found some of his old schoolwork. She kept everything of George's. He was her little angel. The book was covered with pictures he'd drawn of his feelings. An angry face, a sad face. She also showed me a box. George had been 7 or 8 and came downstairs holding this box, which he'd wrapped up in so much sellotape it looked like a mummy. "Whatever you do, Mum, don't open this box until I get back from school. I'm giving it to you to look after, but please, please, please don't open it." As soon as he came back that day, my aunt could tell he was happy. "George, you seem to have had a really good time at school." "Yeah, Mum, that's because of the box." "Well, what's in the box?" "I woke up this morning feeling a bit angry, so I put all my emotions into the box and wrapped them up. I wanted to have a good day at school, and I knew that if my emotions escaped, everything would be ruined. We can open them up now, though." Wow. It blows my mind that he was so young and yet felt as if he had to lock his emotions away like this just so he could get through the day. He'd been told that his emotions were unacceptable. This was his response, a kind of emotional amputation. George was on Ritalin from a really early age, a drug that zoned him out. And as time went on, the system continued to try to suppress him by categorizing him. By its standards, his behavior wasn't acceptable. From an early age, he was bombarded with the same messages we all are. You need to do this, you need to do that. But that wasn't for him, as he had the sort of free spirit that wasn't compatible with tick boxes and rigid ways of looking at the world. He always felt he was capable of doing so much more than the system ever gave him credit for. People thought they were helping him, but the only solution they ever seemed to provide was to force a drab uniformity on him. They should have been helping him grow, but instead they squeezed and shrank his soul. Chucked him a load of medication, chucked him counselling sessions that never worked. And because nobody ever taught him how to manage or control his emotions, he was always seesawing between up and down. When he was on medication, he could hold down a job. But when he came off of it, his brain would be turning over at 1,000,000 miles an hour, pushing him to do stuff that fell outside the narrow limits of the menial job he'd been forced to take. A bunch of small problems mounted up. Then one day, everything became too much. He texted his mum, telling her how much he loved her, but also that he didn't believe he was made for this world. George got himself into such a dark place that he made the decision to take his own life. He was just 24. Death is among the few certainties in this world. We're all going to depart into that blackness one day. And before we do, we'll all lose people we love dearly. That's life. But knowing this will never reduce the pain we feel. When George took the path that separated us from him forever, it left our whole family stricken with grief. It was too cruel and too incomprehensible a tragedy for any of us to absorb fully. So many people want to talk to me about loss. They're haunted by the death of parents, partners, or friends. They want to know how they can get over the loss, how they can deal with it, how they can move on. Grief becomes another wall standing between them and their chances of living a good, fulfilled life. A lot of them feel as if they can't let go. Every time they try to get going again, they're stopped in their tracks by grief and guilt. How? I've heard countless people ask me, can I enjoy my life knowing that they're not with me anymore? Their devastation takes them away from their kids, their partners, their work colleagues, all those people who rely on them, because ultimately, loss steals something from us all. I think one of the reasons they approach me is that it's something that I've dealt with since I was young. From the death of my father, through the many tragedies I experienced in the military, onto my mother's death during the pandemic. In many ways, my existence has been defined by death and loss. And this has been intensified by COVID, which has left so many people mourning lives that ended far too soon. Whole families have been devastated by a cruel virus that attacks every generation. The first thing I say is that mourning the loss is important. It's an essential part of recognising that there is one thing they cannot do. They can never bring that person back. As horrible and painful as it is for them to have to accept, they need to acknowledge that their loved one is gone forever. You can't go back in time and stop them from getting cancer or catching COVID. It breaks my heart to say this, but it's now too late for us to save George. But you cannot mourn them forever, because you cannot allow the loss of those you cherish from stopping you getting on with the only really important business we have, living. This, for me, is where visualization comes in. It's something that really helps me in many aspects of my life, especially when it comes to dealing with complex emotions. If I can visualize loss, then it stops being a frightening, incomprehensible force and starts being something I can touch and understand. In the process, it loses a lot of its power. When we lose someone we care for, it creates a gaping void in our life that acts like a black hole. It feels as if this void sucks all the light and everything good into it. That was certainly true of my family for a while after George's death. A lot of people struggling with loss exist in a strange space where the void in their life is simultaneously the most significant element in their existence. It governs their mood, their energy, their ability even to get out of bed in the morning, yet is also something they do anything they can to avoid thinking about. There are two options in this kind of situation. You can leave the void empty, and although you might spend the rest of your life tiptoeing around it, trying to pretend it isn't there, I guarantee you will end up falling into it sooner rather than later. It will appear when you least expect, and you'll struggle to get back up. Or you can try to fill that void with positivity. You'll never fill it completely. Some pain will always be there. But you'll reach a point where you live alongside that void without ever being in danger of tipping over into it. I believe that this is what that person you cared so deeply about would want. They wouldn't want you to become a victim trapped in the void their departure created. They wouldn't want you to lock yourself away from the world, nor would they want you to lose yourself in misery or put your life on hold. So celebrate that person and their life. Search your memory for all those fond moments from your shared past that brings a smile to your face. Look at the photos of holidays you remember enjoying. Revisit the jokes you shared, or stories of funny things they used to do or say. Talk with others. See what memories they have to share with you. Think about what you're doing now and who you're doing it for. Celebrate what they brought to your life and to the lives of many, many others. The fact that we are here at all for any amount of time is incredible. Our existence is an extraordinary gift that we're given against the odds. The fact that your father died is sad, but the fact that he ever walked the planet and smiled and cared for you and others is beyond special. You're not doing this to forget them or to erase them from history. You're doing this to ensure that their legacy lives on. A negative has been flipped into a positive. My family has done that with George, thinking about all of his jokes and quirks. And I do the same with comrades from the Special Military Unit when we get together to reminisce. We sit up until 3 or 4 in the morning, chatting about old times, who we were then, and what we did. And when we do, we don't think about the fact that they were shot in the head. We laugh at their eccentricities. For instance, there was one lad that loved juggling so much he used to bring all his equipment on tour. You'd come back wired from a mission and he'd be buzzing around our base on his unicycle like an absolute lunatic. That's the image of him that we all make sure we all carry around with us. The process might take months, it might take years, it doesn't matter. Treat it like a lifelong mission. What's important is that when your mind sends you tumbling back into that void your friend or loved one left, you'll find it's filled with positive, happy memories. When you talk about that person, you'll instantly start thinking of all the good things that they represented. So although the void will always be there, you will eventually be able to build a bridge across it that enables you to take steps towards a new future that isn't defined by your grief. Ashley Kane is an amazing example of this. He and his former partner, Safia Vorji, lost their daughter Azalea to acute myeloid leukemia when she was just 8 months old. He's dealing with that tragedy in exactly the way I hope I would if, God forbid, anything were ever to happen to any of my kids. In the spring of 2022, he set out on a 100-mile ultramarathon from Nuneaton to Trafalgar Square in London in her memory. He pushed his body to its absolute limits. Never in a million years would he have achieved something like that if it had not been for what he'd been through. He was dealing with his grief in a way he could understand, doing everything he could to fill the void Azalea had left with positivity. The searing pain he experienced during that run helped him understand what his daughter went through. But the pain that was helping him maintain that connection with his daughter was also the thing that was keeping him going. It did not just help him to cope, it allowed him to move on. I joined him on his final leg to give him some support. I wanted to pump his lion's heart with a bit of motivation. I remember we spoke as he trudged forward. "Did you ever think you'd do this?" I asked him. "No, never. You're doing this because of her. Do you know who gave you that purpose and drive? Your daughter. This is process for progress." Yes, he picked up his pace. Every step you take is another positive memory that will help fill up the void that your daughter left. Azalea could have just ended up as a statistic. Instead, listen to what people are saying about her. Think about how many orange hearts and balloons you've seen today. That will always be the first thing I'll remember when I think about your daughter. And you've helped do this. You've passed that positivity to so many other people. Look at them. They're smiling, cheering. At the moment, you're living your life through your daughter, but you still have your own life to live. None of what's happened should stop you from going out for a beer with the lads or having nice things. He nodded, smiling through gritted teeth. How much courage and strength has it taken for you to be out here right now? I asked him. All of it. How easy would it be for you to just go down that little alley there and fall down onto your face and cry? To just quit? I could do that right now, Ant. But you're not going to, are you? Life is one big fight. Now your fight has just got a bit harder. But you're not going to give in. If anything, what's happened has infused you with even more purpose and passion. He carried on. A few hours later, he had finished. But I'm still in awe of him and what he achieved. One last thing. I know this method works for me because I've seen what happens when you try to ignore your grief. For 20-odd years, I left empty the void that my father's death had created. Time and again, whether by drinking too much or fighting, I fell into it because I couldn't really accept what had happened. And because I tried to do anything I could to avoid confronting those hard truths. And then, one day, I said to myself, this has to stop. I realised that my father wouldn't have wanted me to live in this poisonous cycle of patiently rebuilding everything only to fuck it up once more and bring it all crashing down around me. What he would have wanted was for me to be happy, to succeed, to have a lovely family. So I started to talk about him more. I shared memories with my own family. I celebrated the positive mindset I'd inherited from him and did what I could to pass that on to my own children. Grain by grain, these small positive actions helped fill the void. Ignorance is bliss. George decided he needed to escape from his life. Only he knows why. That's something we always have to accept. George thought there was only one way to deal with his problems, and he did it that way. Now, me and his mum might not have agreed with him, and what he did left us with devastating pain. But it was his decision. Speculation about his reasons won't get us anywhere. The same truth is in the aftermath of any loved one's death. You can't dig yourself into a hole like I did after my father died by asking impossible questions. Why isn't he here? Why don't I have a dad anymore? Why is there nobody to be proud of me? Why is there nobody to be disappointed in me? That person takes all those answers with them. It might seem hard and it will inevitably be frustrating, but you must make your peace with everything you don't know, because there's nothing you can ever uncover that will ever make you feel better. There's no question you can ever ask that will elicit a reply that will satisfy you. Everybody hurts. You must also remember that you're not the only individual in your circle affected by grief. Think about the impact your behaviour is having on others. Ask yourself again, is this what the person you have just lost would have wanted? Always think hard about what the grief-stricken need from you. I try never to sugarcoat stuff or to fall back on those awful, useless cliches such as, I don't know what to say. What use is that? What good do you think that does for them? If you haven't even bothered to think about what those who've lost someone might want or need to hear, then why are you even in this room? That's the strength that you can bring to the table. If your friend has just lost her dad, you might have been affected, but you're not going through the same grief. So you can bring them an outside perspective, a clarity of mind that they might find useful, and which for the moment, quite understandably given they're blooded by pain, is beyond their reach. You can take some of that pain from them. Slow and steady. There probably won't be a magic bullet. Whatever progress in dealing with your loss you make will be incremental. It's enough that you feel 0.01% better today than you did yesterday. That's still progress. Yeah, it's going to be shit. It's going to be hard. That's life. But it will get better if you do this. It might get better if you keep hoping for big leaps forward, but you can't rely on it. Swinging from one extreme to the other like George is no way to exist. So be disciplined. Get into a routine. Leave the house. Being out and about can be a lifesaver. That could be anything from walking the dog to a full-blown workout. On those days when you feel as if there's no hope, seek out the people who love and know you. Use them. Don't feel shy about demanding help. If they've got your best interests at heart, they'll give you what you need. Lessons. Grief following a loss will create a terrible void inside you. You cannot ignore it, and you will never be able to rid yourself of it. But you can begin to fill it with happy, positive memories of that person. You will be ensuring that every time you think of them, you will be celebrating the fact that they existed. You should never feel as if you're betraying the memory of that loved one by moving on and enjoying your life. They wouldn't have wanted you to be in mourning forever. They would have wanted you to be happy. The best way you can honour their memory is to respect those wishes. Be like Ashley Cain. Turn your pain into passion. Use all of that grief and emotion to help you achieve something positive. Something you wouldn't have been able to do without this wave of motivation. The dead take their truths into the grave with them. So don't drive yourself crazy by asking why they left you or if there was anything you could have done to prevent their passing. If you're never going to be able to find the answer, why hurt yourself by asking the question?